Okay, good morning. Welcome to Tulane University. It is my pleasure to introduce our next session, Commercial Leadership and Low Carbon Innovation with Geoffrey Richardson, Senior Vice President at ExxonMobil. If time allows, at the end of the session, the panel will take questions submitted by the audience. We have a QR code on the screen, and we'll pop that up on the other screens a little bit later. They'll get to the questions if we have time. In the meantime, please be sure to silence your cell phones. Enjoy the conversation, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, Drake Hernandez, Senior Fellow at the Tulane Energy Law and Policy Center.
All right, perfect. This thing's on. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's a real pleasure to be here with Jeff to talk about the commercial landscape for low carbon fuel projects and more broadly, Jeff's experience in the sector and in his career, right? So I'll let him talk about it more, but a Tulanean from the law school has had a storied career traveling around the world doing very interesting things. But why don't we just get into it and let you talk a little bit about your background. So from what I've seen, it almost seems like you've had 4 careers at once since graduating. Can you step me through your path from law to banking to Silicon Valley and then ultimately onto Exxon?
Sure. So I graduated from Tulane Law School in 1995, which is amazing since I'm only 39, so I was very precocious. I started as a project finance lawyer with Sherman and Sterling in New York. A lot of heavy industry, so steel, oil and gas, satellites, power. And then I had the opportunity to move to the project finance desk at Morgan Stanley, where we did a lot of, prior to '08, they had a commodity hedging outfit. So we did a lot of energy, power, same things, but we take volatile cash flows, fix them, and then do debt and equity. And then in '07, I discovered wind and solar. And at the time, no one in New York was really doing it, so I started going to California. And between '07 and '14, I probably went to California 75 times. So I was on a few boards, did wind, solar, biofuels, next generation technologies, all the energy segments. I've seen a lot of failures. I've seen some spectacular successes. Saw Tesla come out, things like that. And then in '14, I decided it was time to take a swing, go to the company side, and I scaled 3 companies as CFO. So I did autonomous cars. I took an electric plane company public. And then 2.5 years ago, my ex-CEO of Cruise, which was the GM's autonomous car company, called me up and said, I'm thinking about doing a startup at ExxonMobil where we pump industrial emissions under the ground. Would you do it with me? And I was like, that sounds utterly ridiculous, but let's go do it. So that's my career.
So just for, I guess, foundational knowledge here and edification for folks in the audience, can you just talk a little bit more about project finance? Because I imagine that's going to be a common theme, in particular structuring in the low carbon space as we go through the conversation.
Yeah, so project finance, I've done it from a couple aspects. I've done it from the legal side, and I've done it from the banking side. What it basically is you take an asset, and instead of looking at a corporate credit, you're looking at the cash flows that come from that asset. So if there's an issue with the project, whether it's a power plant or whatever it is, if the power plant's not working, you're not getting paid. Now you could have a portfolio of these, but it's really understanding what could go wrong legally, what is the step-in rights, what's the recourse. It's a very common tool to build something. And then on the banking side, so on the legal side, I really got to understand what are the remedies, what could go wrong, how do you step in. Everyone should have to work on a bankruptcy at some point, just so you understand what credit and project finance really is. When things go bad, you learn more in the failures than you do the successes. And then on the banking side, you brutally learn what credit is. Like, where's the money going? How's it getting to you? Just follow it, and it's credit, credit, credit. Mm-hmm. So that's my view of project finance.
Good. All right, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, so let's talk about your experience at Exxon in particular. Most people know Exxon for being the oil and gas major, but can you tell me a little bit more about the low carbon solution business at the outset? And what role does the low carbon solution team play within the broader Exxon ecosystem?
Yeah, the thesis of low carbon solutions is the world's emissions have gone up and to the right. ExxonMobil's emissions have gone up and to the right. When Darren Woods made public pledges that he was going to cut and start bringing Exxon's emissions down, before they did that, it's a very engineering-driven place, they looked at all of their assets worldwide and understood what is the policy, what is the technology, what is the cost, and which assets to abate there. Huge amount of work went into that. And then what they discovered is the world has a long way to go to abate industrial emissions. And they did a huge amount of work so that they could say, this is how we would do it for our own assets. And similar to how AWS came out of Amazon, AWS was originally something for Amazon, the cloud for Amazon, and then they're like, I wonder if other people want it. He said, we're doing this for ourselves, maybe there's a business here. And they hadn't really started a business since LNG, and Cruise in particular was a startup wholly run as a company that was owned originally and then we sold down by General Motors. So this is what Dan and I did. We scaled a new business within a big company, and that's how we got there. Because you can't do what you're doing in traditional methods with new businesses, right? And so that's the thesis of the division.
And your role as Senior Vice President for Commercial and Business Development. For the audience, what does that mean? How would you describe that, and what's your day-to-day tend to look like?
On a very simple basis, my team finds revenue and originates deals. So an example of that is we do carbon capture and storage. We've abated 10 MTA in 7 contracts for third parties. So hydrogen, steel, methanol, power. Like we did the deal with Calpine, we did the deal with Linde, and what we do is we identify in the market who has a high probability and who is sincere about actually doing a transaction, and then we structure something that works for them and work for us. If it doesn't hit their rate of return and the rate of return that's acceptable to both of us, very little happens in the real world. So we spent a lot of time scouring it. We have teams in Singapore, teams in Europe, teams in the Middle East, and the biggest team is in Houston. So it's a worldwide business, but most of the business that we've done and the most advanced piece is on the Gulf.
I see. Okay. So let's dive in a little bit to the individual kind of, I guess, sub-businesses that would exist within LCS. Low carbon solutions. So one of which you talked about pretty substantially so far is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And definitely want to get into that. Also, generally what I classify as low carbon fuels, which would be historic production of fuels in a decarbonized way. And then the production of low carbon firm power capacity. So if we start with CCUS, right? I would say generally in pop culture, CCUS is referred to kind of as a monolith, right? It's seen as a tool to mitigate emissions from the industry, but a lot of the nuance is lost in that discussion. Recently in the center, we published a piece talking about the whole value chain, right? And CCS is a value chain of emitters, pipelines, utilization, and sequestration, and values created differently across the chain in order for these projects to get developed. So this is a pretty high-level question, but can you just chat a little bit more about CCUS or carbon management or whatever you want to call it, and Exxon's role in the sector?
Yeah, I'd break it down into you need a capture system at the industrial site. Then you have the pipeline, then you have the storage. On the capture itself, that's the piece that we need to bring down the cost of. That is the hardest piece and the piece right now. There's a lot of people working on trying to bring that cost down. We have a partnership with Mitsubishi Heavy Industry to try to cost that down. We need the costs to come out of that, both for ExxonMobil's sites and for third-party business. And so the ones that have worked, the deals that we've done, are referred to as high concentration streams. So there's a lot of emissions coming out, which means they're efficient because since a lot's coming out, you're capturing a lot and you're effectively making money off of that. And that's the piece for the lower emissions, we need to take the cost out. So our piece in that is, we're not in this, to be an equipment seller, but that's the piece we're actually putting a lot of weight behind because we want the cost to come down, because we need the industry in the world needs the cost to come down. On the pipeline and the storage, the first 3 deals that we did were what I call point-to-point. You have an emitter, you have pore space, you build a pipeline to the pore space. We were trying to answer 3 questions at the time. Question 1 was, do we think CCS is a business? Question 2 was, is it a business for ExxonMobil? Because we're pretty big. Third one is, would we build Baytown, which is an $8 billion blue hydrogen and ammonia facility at the Baytown refinery that does 7 million tons a year of emissions. That's, if you do 7 million tons times 30, that's 200 million tons that you have to find something to do with. Mm-hmm. The answers we came up with were, yes, it's a business. It's not a business for Exxon unless we buy a company called Denbury, which had a 900-mile pipeline through Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. And no, we wouldn't do Baytown unless we bought Denbury. So the conclusion of those deals was we wanted to build a system. And so we have a pipeline that runs all across the Gulf, which allows people to come to the pipeline. It gives us access to pore space all up and down, and we own the pore space off of the Houston Ship Channel, both on the state and the federal water. So we have a lot onshore, we have a lot offshore. So we have a huge position of subsurface, and it opens up the entire Gulf to us. And we also bought it. There's a lot of legal and other reasons, but a simple one is like permitting. With the Denbury acquisition, we have 4 shots for permitting of pore space. We have 3 different EPA offices, and then Louisiana has primacy for the permitting, as opposed to if you are in one pore space, one place, you're trying to get a permit through in one place. And so there's a lot of reasons why we did that.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of what you're talking about resonates with the traditional kind of oil and gas framework, right? You're talking about pipelines, you're talking about moving molecules from point A to point B. One of the things I always like to say is, it's important to note that CCS, or carbon dioxide in particular, it's not an energy vector in and of itself, right? It's a solution to decarbonize the use of energy. But we generally, a lot of it's the same people in the room, so they're talking the book that they know. But I just want to, ask you a little bit about the project-on-project risk associated with the whole value chain that you just laid out. And importantly, just risk management in this context. I mean, how do you take these discrete material commercial opportunities, weave them together, and get them to the point to where either an off-taker is comfortable or, if you need it, a financier would be comfortable?
The risk you're referring to, we really struggled with when it was point-to-point. The reason we struggled with it is you get a contract, you have your pore space. Your pore space still needs to get permitted for what's called Class 6 wells to put under. Then you're taking subsurface risk. Exxon is world-class at subsurface. If even being world-class and having all the tools, if you knew everything, you wouldn't drill dry wells, which, oil and gas spends $1 billion and has a dry well, right? And so no one, until you get down there, you don't really know what you have. The other thing that people underestimate is the Gulf is like Swiss cheese. People have been drilling since the 20s there. And so if you go on and your obligation is to put things down and there's wells, legacy wells there, it's a lot of money to plug all those wells, and they weren't your wells, and that's what blows the whole thing up. And so for us, we never could really get comfortable with the risk profile. And ultimately, the contract that you sign had to reflect that. Because you need, okay, well, if I'm going point to point, what happens if I have a fatal flaw with my pore space? I can't live with a 12, 20-year obligation. We do 12, 20-year deals.
Sorry, what's that mean, 12, 20-year deals?
The duration of our deal is 12 or 20 years. So we have an obligation that we put the full weight of our credit and our reputation behind delivering what we're going to say we're going to do for 12 or 20 years. I've signed both. If there's a problem, I can't have a running loss for 12 years. With a system which has multiple pore spaces and redundancy, what could go wrong is significantly de-risked. Like we show customers, here's everything we needed to get comfortable with this in the pore space in the old contract. Here's what we can do because we can mitigate our risk because we have a portfolio and we have a lot of places to put this. So for us, scale was the way we mitigated those things, and scale and redundancy. Yeah. And it plays to the strengths of the company. So like one of the things is if you look at what we do, as you pointed out, pretty good at pipelines, pretty good at subsurface. So we're playing in a space where we have inherent capabilities as opposed to doing something that we don't have an advantage or inherent capabilities.
Yeah, so the next question I was going to ask that's already been addressed here is scale and redundancy is the key risk mitigant, right? When I think about, I do quite a lot of work in the dispute space as a testifying expert, and a lot of these commercial disputes and the contractual disputes hinge on what's the cover standard say? Are you able to go out and procure the requisite molecule to replace the molecule that you couldn't deliver, and what's the cost associated with that? But if we're talking about kind of one-way traffic here, as it were, having that physical redundancy provides a physical hedge against potential issues with projects.
It's physical redundancy. It's also AA credit. Like we will, interestingly, there's a lot of talk, and you've probably seen this, and people publish this, that at some point this is supposed to stay under the ground forever, and then people ask the questions, well, what happens if it comes up in 100 years? And so there's been a lot of movement in the sector for emitters to limit the time that they're responsible for. We take the view, if it's our site, doesn't matter what the law says, doesn't matter what the contract says. If there's a contract, that's ExxonMobil's problem. So when we go into these deals, we assume, even if we can lay off the obligations, that given who we are, given our scale, given the place we have in the world, if there's a problem, we are always responsible for the problem. And so that's been discussed and aligned. And so we have to get comfortable owning and living with these obligations and the scale of the place and the scale of what we're trying to do. I mean, ultimately, we think that CCS is the key to industrial emissions, and we'd like to be part of abating, in the Gulf, 100 million tons of emissions a year. That's like what we're ultimately solving for in the 2040s. Right now, we're up to 10 third-party, Baytown 7, and then we're working on some other projects that would put us above 20, and it's pretty early days.
Yeah, very exciting. And I mean, it requires the likes of an Exxon to come and, take ownership of the pore space and the potential emissions down the line. Otherwise, I mean, the sort of risk for a company that's not of that scale, it's just immense.
In the early days that I was there was a lot of companies that thought they could do self-help. And cool, go ahead. That's what we always said, like, call us if you need us.
Yeah.
Like, everyone can do what they want to do. And almost without exception, all of them have called us and thrown in the self-help thing.
Sure. So let's talk about, we've talked about taking the CO2, putting it on a pipeline, pushing it underground. Let's go a bit more upstream, as it were, focus specifically on the emitters, right? And I really want to dive into what seems to be the topic of at least the day, if not the year, if not the next 3 years, which is low carbon firm power capacity. So it's been talked about plenty so far over the course of yesterday and today, but we're seeing demand for energy and power in particular grow at a level that we haven't seen in recent history. I mean, we're looking at a world in the utility work that we were doing where load growth was effectively stagnant, maybe 1% per year, that was even just 5 years ago now, and we're talking about a situation now where ERCOT's anticipating peak demand that's 3 times its current peak demand by, I think it was like the mid-2030s at the very least, if not earlier than that. So what are the implications of this growth? It seems to be a material step change.
The implications are the load growth is there's been almost all the new construction last 15 years has largely been wind, solar, and batteries. The load growth and the demands for firm, reliable power, because the data centers actually solve for 5 nines of reliability, whether it's through the provider, the grid, them doing diesel, all these things, but they never want those data centers to be going down. They're very particular in their requirements. There will be a combined cycle new gas build, point out. And it's interesting for our business because there's a couple of things that are going to hit that. Number one, the real ultimate payers of the data centers are the Googles, the Microsofts, the Metas, the Amazons of the world. They're doing really well right now, and they have very firm commitments on getting to net zero. So they have the ability to pay a premium, and they have the mandate from their boards to pay a premium. And so the first question in all of this is there someone willing to pay? And you have someone who has the ability to pay. So that's interesting. The second thing is when you think about building combined cycle gas, you're thinking about a 30-year life cycle. So you're spending billions and you're building something for 30 years. No one who's thinking 30 years and doing projects for 30 years worries about what politics are today, next year, 2 years from now. You need to think, what is it going to be for 30 years? So all of the companies that are doing it, even if they don't feel the pressure today, they believe they will have to do this. So that's why you're seeing either companies talking to us about doing, helping power companies do abated power, or like in Louisiana, Entergy's deals with Meta are CCS enabled ready when they pay for that. And so I think most of those will have ultimately, whether it's in the short term or the long term, CCS. Our role in that is we do molecules, we don't do power. And so there's companies spending billions of dollars to make the Permian net neutral. They're going to electrify a lot. And so they're going to have that gas will have a very low CI content that we can certify to. So we have low CI gas. We're working on the capture piece to bring the cost down for there. And then we have the system. So all of this, whether it's today, next year, 2 years from now, we're kind of in the middle of it because we're not going to do the power piece of it, but all the pieces that go around it to make it low CI, that's what we do.
Solution, right?
Yeah.
So just wind the clock back 10 years, talking about trying to meet large-scale industrial load, 5 nines. It seemed like the aspiration was we're going to do wind, solar, storage, and everything's going to be fine. What opportunities are available today that might not have been available 10 years ago? And I think you alluded to this in your response just now, but I think it's important to bifurcate, just the reality that we're facing now and the opportunity we have now versus what was, contemplated 10 years ago.
Look, I've financed and worked on gigawatts of wind and solar. It's an all the above. I believe in all of it. The reality is the demand's going to outstrip the supply. For a while, it's really interesting because I spent time with all the key hyperscalers. They're both terrified of being short power and terrified of being long power. And it's all the people that are, it depends where you are in the company. When you talk to the data center guys, they're terrified of being short and they can't get enough power. When you talk to the finance people, their CapEx, including the chips and so forth, is $100 billion a year. So they're terrified in the commitments of what they're signing up and what happens if they're long. And so no one quite knows what this is. If you saw Oracle's stock yesterday, seems like it's pretty big and something's happening. But there's a general terror of being long and short at the same time. And it depends what your seat is.
And what about kind of the next phase of this, right? Enabling from here to the next 10 years, right? We've got demand forecasts that are aggressive, to say the very least. We need the solution. We need deployment, right? So, yeah. What do you?
I think they need to be more, look, the market's having a really interesting time. There's what people want and what they can get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a mismatch, right? Like if you talk to the hyperscalers, they have to be out of a hurricane zone, right? Like, I don't want to be in a hurricane zone. Well, and I want abated power. Well, like our pipeline, most of it runs through a hurricane zone, right? And so there's going to be a push and a shove. And I think that the phase we're in right now, we're using up the existing logical things. That's why you're seeing the nuclear coming back on. And there's going to be a lot of wind and solar pulling the subsidies on that, which is happening. I'm not smart enough, and that's not my sector anymore, so I don't really know what the impact of that is. I don't spend time there anymore. I used to. But I can tell you there is a combined cycle build coming, and I can tell you that the last time that cycle happened, it resulted in a bust, right? So these things, so the people who've lived through that cycle remember that. I remember the bust. I'm old enough to be in the game when it busted last time. And so people are wary of, is the forecast real? And people are building to it, but, you know, we'll see.
So being wary of whether the forecast is real rings very true to my experience in the last 5 years in hydrogen. So
Yeah.
Why don't we shift gears there just for a bit? As I mentioned earlier, I generally refer to these as low carbon fuels, but one area in particular would be low carbon ammonia, right? And again, by coincidence, I didn't plan this. The Center's also recently released a piece discussing low carbon ammonia, and the idea behind that piece was, you know, we've been using ammonia for a heck of a long time for very fundamental things like producing fertilizers to feed people. But the situation around low carbon ammonia it's much more nuanced, involving various policy mechanisms such as carrots and sticks to stir development within the sector. So the question here is, you know, from your perspective, what's even driving this discussion at the outset?
Yeah. I think the real pull, where I sit, I get paid to get deals done. So I use a phrase, what's the push or the pull? Like, what is pulling or pushing this? The pull on low carbon ammonia, and and what blue ammonia is, by the way, is you produce hydrogen, the emissions go to our system, we pump them underground, that's what makes it blue. If you use all renewables and electrolyzer, that's green, so we're blue. Then the hydrogen gets turned into ammonia, which is a feedstock for fertilizer. And then in Japan, following Fukushima, they built very advanced coal plants. They're going to buy ammonia to co-fire with coal. And so the real pulls for ammonia are Japan, which is giving carrots. So they're going to subsidize the difference between unabated ammonia and abated ammonia. So that's real.
Abated, not abated.
Yeah.
Just to
Abated is, if it's not with CCS, it's called gray. If it's with CCS, it's blue. So the Japanese are using a carrot, and either with an industrial or power, but mostly power, it will let the companies buy it the gray price, and then the taxpayers will pay the extra cost for the blue. And so that's the Japanese approach. The European approach is the other pull, and they have escalating costs. It's called a CBAM and an ETS, but they're taking more of a stick approach, and that really gets phased in over 2030 to 2034. And so you have one which is more carrot-like, one is more stick-like, and that's your pull for the ammonia. And in each of the case, there's either a subsidy that, you know, to simplify it, one is subsidies, one's a penalty, and that's creating the market pull for people to build on the Gulf. So right now, there's going to be multiple projects on the Gulf to serve that that need.
Ultimately, whether it's a pull or a push from a deal perspective, you have to get to a number that makes sense, right? So I've given a talk in the past in London, and I call it mind the gap between willingness to pay and cost of production, right? And if you're not able to rectify that gap, it just seems like there's no way that this project would move forward, particularly in the context of kind of structuring and what it's going to take to get these projects off the ground.
Yeah, I think what happened, if people went to a conference 3 years ago, all it was blue hydrogen, all it was hydrogen and ammonia. Like everything was hydrogen and ammonia. If you go to a conference today, everything is AI, everything. And I think what really happened on a very simplistic basis, the hydrogen and ammonia, is when it started, that was when it really got going and everyone was talking about it, that was the start of that inflation. And so the problem of what's happened to these projects is they're all, I don't know, pick a number, 20, 25, 30% more expensive. And so to do something that's clean is already more expensive. And then the inflation that everyone's feeling on everything is happening in the sector. So you're already taking something that's more expensive. And so when you look at the idea and the numbers that you were running, so for example, like when we started this, we thought that Japan would have more volume, like buy more, and they've cut their volume because it costs more because you have to compensate for the inflation. And on a very simplistic level, that has hurt this effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Just widening the gap. Okay, so there's one last kind of real question here for you, shifting away from the low carbon solutions team, shifting more towards Jeff. You know, there are a number of students here in the audience, and I got to say this is one of my favorite questions to ask at university energy conferences because I remember sitting in the audience and really clinging to every word. But I want to break this down into two parts, and I'll start with this one. What advice would you give yourself when you were here at Tulane?
Yeah, it's interesting. Do something you like.
Okay.
In other words, like, you're going to have a better career and a better outcome if you're passionate about what you're doing, right? One of the main reasons that I left banking for a company is one of the main motivations for a lot of bankers is to make a bonus. It is. You pay well, they do it. It's fairly shallow, to be honest with you. Like, it's good living, you get a bonus, but it's not, you know, at some point you're like, there must be more to this.
Sure.
And so the reason I went to California was, you know, and I've worked in a lot of different markets. I found California to be fascinating because most people there, not all, but most, they don't start off with, oh, cool, I'm going to become really wealthy. They start off with, I have a product, I have a service, I want to do something good, I want to change something, I want to be my own boss. Like, all of those things run through it. And the ecosystem of helping people is really interesting. And failure, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough.
Sure.
Right? Like, failure in Houston and New York is such an orphan. Failure in California, and this isn't a plug for California, by the way. Failure in California is part of the business. You don't start AI, you don't do the cloud, you don't do energy transition, you don't have new things unless you try something. So if you look at the arc of my career, I probably got riskier as I've gotten older, which is like the opposite of what most people do. Being a lawyer at Sherman & Sterling is pretty conservative. Being a banker, all right, there's a new career, but like, I mean, how far can you know, still Morgan Stanley, Goldman, right? Like, the worst thing that happens, I have to leave. Going to a startup when you have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, that was pretty interesting. And then who the hell goes from Silicon Valley to ExxonMobil, right? So for me, each of those had an interest, and I thought I could do something. And you know, I get the question all the time, which is related to that. Why did you go to Exxon? You live in California. You could continue to do that. And the answer is pretty simple. my seat has the ability to bend the curve of like energy transition because they publicly said that my division gets 30 billion over the next 6 years, and we have a ton of engineers. And so if you can point those at something I want to do, that's a lot of money and a lot of engineers. And it really takes to put steel on the ground money and engineers. So for me, that's the reason why I'm doing this. It's an opportunity. Whether I bend the curve or not, I have no idea. That's up to me, the team, the company, all those things. But it's an opportunity to try and go bend the curve. And so that would be my advice for my younger self. And I probably didn't figure that out till I was about, 45.
Yeah.
I mean, I was doing it, but I never really thought about it. And so think about it, find something you like, and try and bend the curve.
Yeah. Next question is going to sound similar, but there is some nuance and it's a little bit different. What do you wish you would have known when you were at Tulane?
Yeah, interesting. I was having dinner last night with someone that I went to school with, and they asked, how did you get to your seat you are? It's such a weird career path, right? Going lawyer here to there. And the best way I can explain it is, and I think this is all the training I've had, I can take very complicated pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and put them together in my mind generally faster than other people. And so I'm normally ahead of, not everyone, like the guy who hires me and I work with is very good. But I normally can see things and put the pieces together in a way that works. And I need to make it work for my company. I need to make it work for another company. I need to make it work for policy. Like within policy, I need to make it work for regulators. I need to make the lawyers happy. Like the number of people I have to clear. And so if you look at that list, the Tulane and the law piece helped me on all the contract side of it. I can see those things as well as the lawyers on the deal. The banking helped me get to the return and the numbers as well as those people of the deal. And then I had to learn how to understand human behavior, because to really do what I do, I think a lot of people, particularly my current company, which is very engineering driven, thinking this is a spreadsheet. At the end of the day, it's really still people deciding to do something or not doing something, and managing the people side of it is the hardest piece. And so I don't know what I tell myself on that, but that's kind of what I've learned, and I didn't have any of that, any clue of that back in the day.
Sure. It brings another question to mind regarding legal training. One of the things I really appreciate about your background is the fact that you are a lawyer, you have the JD, you did the law thing, and then you decided, I'm going to go do something else. I think the law to banking transition is really, really interesting. But I imagine you see a number of your peers from school who are still doing the legal thing.
Yeah.
And I guess the question I'm coming at here is, for the aspiring lawyers in the audience, maybe talk a little bit about the fact that you certainly seem to have not pigeonholed yourself in a legal capacity strictly. And it seems like you've leveraged that opportunity to open doors beyond what might be anticipated by somebody in a law school program.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone saw Jim Burke's talk yesterday, the Vistra CEO. Jim's chief commercial officer is Stacy Dorr from Louisiana. Stacy's a lawyer also. And so if you look at it, the guy, when we're talking debated power, interestingly, the guy that does that for me was a lawyer, worked at Morgan Stanley, worked on my old desk for my old boss. So that guy's trained two of us, right? And so he's me, not as good looking or things like that, but he's still pretty good. Same MO. I've never believed in, and this is probably the California in me, I've never believed in limitations, and part of what I'm doing now is I've done and worked on a bunch of first-time things. So, I mean, in California, I tried to make not me with engineering, but I did all the fundraising and other things. We're trying to make a piece of steel drive past a playground with no one driving it, right? And so if you think about that from a risk standpoint and a technology standpoint and a market standpoint. Like, it was fun. Like, when I joined Exxon, they sat us down and told us about the whole safety culture, which is very good and very important. I was like, yeah, we were having steel drive past a playground with no one in it. Like, understand what risk is. Like, there's risk management in a lot of ways. And so I think it just goes to risk. What you find is lawyers, for the most part, are very risk adverse. Most bankers are very risk adverse. I've had 20 bankers come to me, say, I'm miserable, I don't like it, but they pay me really well. What did you do? How did you get out? Have the talk. 5 years later, they're still sitting in the same seat. Like, all right, you're miserable, great. If you're miserable, go do something else. If you don't like it, go do something else. That's what Tulane, we're blessed with an education and opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. But if you don't like what you're doing, if you're not interested in what you're doing, find something else. Yeah. And so for me, I keep bouncing around, failing upwards, whatever I'm doing, because I'm interested in it, and I think I can make a difference, and I can bend the curve.
Absolutely. All right, we have time for what is probably one question from the audience. I think they're going to read them off from the back based on that.
Yes. On the technology front, which emerging innovations, e.g. materials, processes, digitalization, or AI, do you see as having the greatest potential to reduce costs or improve efficiencies in decarbonization technologies?
I mean, interestingly, AI is going to change the world in ways I think we're just starting to understand, but it's a major problem for decarbonization right now because it's making the load growth go up and to the right, and we're not ready for that load growth from a decarbonization standpoint, right? So interestingly, all the great work that's been done in wind and solar, this is going to drive more emissions just because it's so power hungry. I'm not smart enough to know what the next great emission is. I think, in my opinion, having been around energy transition for 20 years, there's not a magic bullet breakthrough. We're all Americans, so we love that pill that makes us lose weight, right? It's a series of taking money out. It's like, look at batteries for power. It's been decades of incremental progress, 10% here in efficiency, 5% in cost, year after year after year. I think of like the car industry as a great model, right? First, they started raising fuel standards, and they did it in the way that was a couple $100. Like, you could still afford the cars. Then they moved to hybrids. Then they're moving to electrification. That change took decades, right? And so for me, I hope I'm wrong and there is a magic bullet that works for everyone, and it's cheap, it's affordable. I think that it's just a lot of blocking and tackling. And on the industrial side, if there was a magic breakthrough in industrials, we hopefully would have found it. Hopefully it's still out there. But it's a lot of, like, our goal for captures is, take 30% of the cost out. If you take 30% of the cost out, this can be deployed at scale in a lot of places it's not today. So a lot of it is just like, what is the tool to get the cost out?
Excellent. That said, Jeff, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us here, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Our next session in this space will be Bridging the Future, Federal Partnerships to Accelerate Energy Innovation, and that session is scheduled to start at 2 p.m.